Today on the Playbook Podcast, Donald Trump is on day 2 of his state visit to the UK. But here in DC, suddenly everyone is obsessing over the cancellation of Jimmy Kimmel's late night show. We will get right into that. And it's another big day for public health as RFK Jr.'s new vaccines committee meets for the first time. Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Thursday, September 18th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. How are you doing today, Megan? Nice to see you.
I'm fantastic, Jack. How are you?
Well, I'm delighted that I've been able to spend so much of the last couple of days watching Britain through the drizzly rain on my TV screen.
It's incredible. Did it make you miss home, Jack?
No, not the slightest. No, I'm afraid not. No, the president could not bring the sunshine with him, could he, sadly?
No, apparently not.
He looked like he was having a pretty good time yesterday.
All the same.
The way this trip works, basically, is that it's split in half. There's a day one, which we saw yesterday, which is the pomp and ceremony stuff with all the royals. And then there's a day 2, which is starting right about now, which is the politics stuff. And Donald Trump will be spending a good portion of the day with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and other members of his entourage for some pretty serious talks, Megan. And we should get into the substance of that before we get into all the drama over here with Charlie Kirk and the fallout from that. I think, there are a few big items on the agenda for Donald Trump today, Megan, and trade is obviously a big one from the UK's perspective because we saw Britain and America sign that trade deal way back in May, I think it was, the first one that Donald Trump has signed, much pizzazz, but actually the UK feels like it needs a better deal than that, and they're hoping to try and get some tariff reductions or something today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has really been one of I think the interesting parts about these trade deals is you make a deal with the U.S., but the deal is not really done. Negotiations continue all the same, and that's a byproduct of one, the fact that some of these, top line deals have been agreed to, but then you actually have to sort out the nitty gritties, and that makes it a lot more complicated. And then 2, we have seen countries negotiate and really trying to push for the best deal that they possibly can. And, from the UK's perspective, significant concerns about steel, right, are among them, concerns about pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of really big issues still on the table. And so even though we all remember the sort of triumphant Oval Office announcement of that UK deal, which was the first trade deal that President Trump notched, there's a lot of work that still has to be done.
You bet. There are things the UK could do a bit of give and take on. There are concerns in the UK about buying American meat products and welfare standards. They could, let some of that slide if they wanted to, although it'd be politically difficult for Starmer to do that. And Britain has something called a digital services tax, which is essentially a tax on companies like Amazon and Apple. And for understandable reasons, the American government absolutely hates that because although it's pitched as like all enormous digital companies will be taxed, obviously they're almost all American. So they see it as a tax on America. So there's things for them to negotiate. How much into the detail of that sort of stuff Donald Trump's going to get when he sits down with Keir Starmer in Chequers, the PM's country residence this morning, I don't know. Is he really a details kind of guy? I'm not sure he is.
He has certain issues that he cares a lot about. Like he does really care about the digital services tax. He's truthed about it. He's talked about it. He thinks it's unfair that American companies are being charged this. So, he's a details guy on certain issues.
Okay. Well, we'll see if anything comes out of that. The sort of set piece moment of the day from the leader's point of view, or that we'll see, is a press conference that's going to happen normally out in the garden in Chequers, which is this beautiful country estate that prime ministers get to use when these talks have finished. And that press conference should be starting at about 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, although sometimes these things slip. That's going to be a really interesting moment, I think, Megan, not just because we'll get to hear what they talked about, but because you get to see them standing side by side, taking sometimes quite aggressive questions from the press. And I'm proud to say the British political media tend to go for it in these situations. They don't hold back. They don't show much deference. And the really thing I'm wondering if we're going to see this morning is we're going to see awkward questions for both men about Jeffrey Epstein, because for people who haven't been following this, an extraordinary sort of set of circumstances, coincidence really, but the guy that Keir Starmer picked to be his British ambassador in Washington back at the start of the year, Peter Mandelson, this sort of old, long-standing political figure on the left in the UK, happened to be an old friend of Jeffrey Epstein. And at the time he was picked, nobody really thought that was going to become this massive issue. And of course, it has become this massive issue over the last 6 months. Eventually, some of the Epstein files started to get published or leaked. And there was the stuff in there about Peter Mandelson was bad enough that last week, Keir Starmer felt he had to fire him from his post as British ambassador to Washington. Now we have President Trump turning up in that context when all of the UK press is obsessing over this story.
I just have to think the one thing is that President Trump and Keir Starmer, they're going to be aligned on wanting to get out of those questions as quickly as possible. So if there's anything that can really unite the UK and the US, I'm sure their shared desire to not deal with those questions.
You're right. Britain has worked so hard to sort of pamper Donald Trump on this trip, and we saw
They
all
have,
that
yeah.
yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
they really spend a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of planning to make him feel good about this trip. The last thing they want is the British media spoiling it all by upsetting him. So, sort of the sort of anarchistic journalist in me wants to see it happen, but who knows? Who knows? We'll see. We'll
Who
see how it pans
knows?
out this morning. The other thing that Trump is bound to get asked about, Megan, is the ongoing fallout from the terrible killing of Charlie Kirk last week. There've been some pretty significant developments on that over the last 12 hours or so. The one that is really DC was completely obsessing about, or the sort of political bubble was obsessing about, was the decision by ABC to pull Jimmy Kimmel's late night show last night over comments he made earlier in the week. And that's become instantly a very, very political decision for them to have made, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think there's a couple things that I'm, thinking about here. I mean, on one hand, you have, the White House lauding this. President Trump weighed in on True Social almost immediately after, in support of the decision. You had FCC Chair Brendan Carr. He was threatening that his agency could actually suspend broadcast licenses, if ABC didn't take action against Kimmel. So I think we see this really interesting dynamic playing out right now where, conservatives are really frustrated and angry about the way that Charlie Kirk's death is being talked about. At the same time, that is butting up against this idea of free speech and the free speech protections that we have in the US. Of course, the FCC exists to regulate the airwaves, so it's not totally uninhibited free speech on TV. And obviously, there are corporate decisions here. ABC, Disney as a company does not have to, endorse or continue to provide a platform for Jimmy Kimmel. But this really is tugging at, I think, some of the strings and the underpinnings of this country, the First Amendment protections of free speech, and what we as a country believe folks should be able to say in public forums, whether that's on a stage at a college campus or on a late night talk show.
I was watching the clip of what he actually said on Monday, and it was sort of almost a passing comment in a
Yeah.
way, as he was trying to make a joke about, surprise, surprise, Donald Trump, who, of course, he frequently makes a lot of very negative jokes about on his show. And he said, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang trying to characterize this kid who killed Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it." The problem is, anyway, you can have a discussion about how you should respond when you've done something like that. Should the network pull your show? I guess, as you say, it's a corporate decision. It's up to them. The problem is, we saw Donald Trump back in July, basically saying, "I've got rid of one talk show host and Jimmy Kimmel's going to be next. Just you watch." We had Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, yesterday morning saying, "I've seen this clip," and essentially threatening ABC, saying if they don't do the right thing, he literally said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." And so at that point, this stops being a discussion about, did he make a big mistake or something worse than that? And it starts being like enormous political pressure being put on them. And, any journalistic organization worth their backbone at that point goes, "Well, I can't fire him now because it just made me look completely craven to the administration." But of course, that is not what has happened.
No, and I think we are in a different political environment than we were a year ago, 2 years ago, certainly 4 years ago. I mean, I think you can just see this in the way that, some of these Ivy League universities have acceded to the administration's demands. You can see it here, I think, in ABC's actions. You can see it in some of the broader, actions by law firms, for instance, to agree to provide pro bono services to the administration. We have seen, I think, this real fear by these entities or from these entities about the actions the administration might take toward them. And so they're sort of preemptively, either making concessions or in this case, taking the action to pull Jimmy Kimmel's show. Again, to your point, I think people will debate whether that was the right or wrong move. But again, this is sort of pointing to the immense power that the administration has and has shown that it is willing to wield to shape the narrative and to make all of corporate America bend to its will.
The other thing to talk about in terms of the fallout from the killing of Charlie Kirk is an even later night Truth Social post we got from Donald Trump. I think it's like 2 o'clock in the morning in the UK.
Yeah, that jet lag is a killer.
That's certainly one way. That's such one way of putting it. The guy just obviously never sleeps. Anyway, we've been talking a lot on the podcast this week about the policy response that we're clearly going to get from the Trump administration to this awful tragedy. There've been lots of rumors. There've been lots of whispers about how they're going to react. This is the first sort of concrete announcement as such from Donald Trump. Let me just read the post out to you. I'm pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I'm designating Antifa, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terrorist organization. I will also be strongly recommending those funding Antifa will be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. Antifa is not actually a thing, is my first query with that. This sort of raises as many questions as it answers,
Yes,
doesn't it?
that
Like,
was
there isn't actually a group called Antifa, as far
no,
as I'm
no.
aware.
That was my first reaction, as well as how do you designate? And Antifa is a movement, right? It's a very loose movement of folks who ascribe to this ideology. So how do you designate an ideology a terrorist organization? So I think that is first and foremost the question: is how is this going to be implemented? And we have not to this point gotten further details on that from the White House.
No, and the second big question it raises is that, as far as I can see, the main way that a president designates terror organizations is they have to be foreign terror organizations.
Yeah.
The whole thing called an FTO, and we've seen that with foreign terror groups in the past. And in fact, we've seen the Trump administration start to bring in some of the Mexican narco gangs, designate them as foreign terrorist organizations. But they are definitely foreign entities.
Yes, they are.
This is a loose domestic network of people who see themselves as anti-fascists and have been prepared to take essentially radical action. It's not clear what legal basis he's talking about here, and it's not clear who he's talking about here. So although he says he's taking a big step, and I'm sure he will, it's really understand at this point what it is he's planning to do and who he's planning to do it to.
No, it's not clear at all. And I do think we will get more details from the White House in the coming days. My colleague Maya Ward had a fantastic piece looking at some of the actions the administration was considering taking, including this one. But, the White House made very clear, talking to her, that, they are considering many actions. And so I would expect this to be the first of many.
Yeah, and maybe we'll get a bit more detail from Trump at the press conference this morning. He's also doing a Fox News interview this afternoon, so we may hear from him then. And indeed, back at the White House when he and Melania Trump should be back, probably will stop and talk to the press too. Then, won't he? Because that's the president. We better just talk about something completely different, because there is another massive thing happening today away from Donald Trump and away from this awful tragedy, which is on the subject of public health. We were talking about this on the podcast yesterday morning. Of course, Susan Menares, the former CDC boss who was forced out by Robert F. Kennedy. Well, RFK Jr.'s vaccine panel that he has completely reconstituted, and in fact was one of the points of contention that they argued about before he fired her, is meeting for the first time today. It is a 2-day meeting of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. They meet in Atlanta, and they are going to run through and reconsider a lot of the rules around vaccine mandates and so on in the US, now with a completely different set of people handpicked by RFK Jr., one of the nation's, perhaps the nation's best known vaccine skeptic. And it feels like something quite significant could come out of this meeting, Megan.
It really could. I think this will be sort of the first real test or example we get of how far RFK and this panel of vaccine advisors want to go and how quickly they're going to go in terms of going after some of these vaccines. I think we sort of know where their feelings are on the COVID-19 vaccine. That one in general, polling shows folks have more nuanced feelings about it because of the time frame on which it was developed and the mRNA technology. There's just in general more questions among the broader public about COVID-19, but they're also going to get into some of these other vaccines that have been commonly given for some of them for decades now. The big one that I'm going to be keeping an eye on is the hepatitis B vaccine, which is given to young children. One of the arguments from some folks is, okay, this is, most kids aren't going to be exposed to Hep B. They're not intravenous drug users. Like, why do little babies need to have this? But one of the things that's really interesting to me, they tried when the Hep B vaccine, came out, they tried to give it just to the most at-risk populations, and they found it wasn't actually decreasing Hep B. And then they instituted this mandate, and it significantly dropped cases of Hep B for children and adolescents. And so, we saw Senator Bill Cassidy talk about this. He, additionally being a senator, is an actual doctor and said, he had personal experiences with cases of children with Hep B and, sort of was pleading with this panel to, not remove recommendations for it. But this is the vaccine that folks believe, if there's going to be one that's removed from the list, and only one, again, setting COVID-19 aside, it's going to be the Hep B vaccine. And of course, anything beyond that would be, sort of an extremely dramatic move. Like if we saw any movement on the measles vaccine, we continue to see measles outbreaks in the U.S. So that would be another sort of really big move. And I think the broader question here is, to what extent does this panel really want to fundamentally reshape these childhood vaccine requirements we have in the U.S.? Parents can make whatever decisions they want for their kids, but these recommendations are taken to heart by parents and are used for, coverage decisions and are really important in the grander scheme of things. And this panel could really significantly reshape that.
Yeah, and it's worth noting Menarez told the Senate yesterday that RFK had said to her that he is going to revisit the childhood vaccine schedule in September, and she needed to be on board with it. And
Yep.
if that were to happen, it will be at this meeting that is starting today. So we'll be watching that closely. RFK Jr. is actually speaking at a different event this morning where he wants to be talking about organ transplants, which may in itself be quite significant given the way he likes to radically reshape things. But I dare say he'll get the chance to answer some questions about her pretty dynamite testimony yesterday about what life is like in the CDC these days. So yeah, I think you can expect that to be a pretty big moving story today. Before we finish, Megan, we've been talking about the Senate hearing yesterday with Susan Menarez. There was a House hearing yesterday with Kash Patel, the FBI chief. Really interesting. Lots of talk about the awful Charlie Kirk killing, of course. Lots of talk about the Epstein files, but also lots of talk about donuts. Did you see this story?
I did.
You may not expect us to turn to Krispy Kreme donuts at the end of this podcast. Kash Patel was getting asked about his stock trading by one of the senators, and he just said in passing that he saw good investment opportunities in Krispy Kreme Inc. And within minutes, Krispy Kreme stock prices went through the roof.
They did.
Up 12%. I hope you were heavily invested in the various donut markets, were you?
Oh yeah, I think the kind of investing I do is, buy a box of a dozen, right, and share them with the coworkers in the office. That's my donut investment. But I mean, I was shocked and not shocked by that. I mean, we've seen the markets really react in unpredictable ways and be really volatile and sort of, abandon some of their caution. So to me, it was a little crazy, but also that's the world we live in. Not surprising to see stocks rally on a Kash Patel talking about donuts.
I've never seen Megan Messerly sharing her donuts with anyone. Maybe I'm not in the office at the right time.
No, you're not, Jack. You're not.
All right, my mistake. Megan, thanks so much for being here. Thanks everyone for listening to today's show. We've got much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we shall be back tomorrow. Thanks very much for listening.